Okay, we're looking at solving absolute value equations using algebra, and this is part 2, a little bit more complicated and mostly kind of quadratic equations that are involved. So I'm going to do 2 examples. Now the first thing you should note is, I have absolute value of a bunch of stuff and I want it to equal 10. So there's 2 things that I could put into where the absolute value symbols are. Either I could have all this stuff here. Either this could equal positive 10 or it could equal negative 10 because it's going to get turned positive anyway. That gives me 2 equations that I can go ahead and solve. One of them is x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals positive 10. And the other is x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals negative 10. And so the work now is just going ahead and solving these 2 equations. First thing you want to do is make sure you have them equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 10 over to the left side. So that gives me minus 8. So it equals 0 now. And now we're going to use all that factoring that we learned earlier. We're going to factor this trinomial. There's no common factors, so it looks like it's going to be an x times an x, and 2 numbers that multiply together to make negative 8 that add up to negative 7. I'm thinking negative 8 and positive 1. And that gives me 2 solutions. To turn this binomial here into 0, x would have to be 8. And to turn the second binomial into 0, x would have to be negative 1. So there's 2 solutions coming from that equation. And on the right side here, I'm going to solve this equation now. So x squared minus 7x, and we're going to add 10 over. So I get plus 12 equal to 0. Always make sure it equals 0. No greatest common factors, so I'm going to try and factor this trinomial as well into the 2 sets of brackets. X and an x, and we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to make positive 12 that add up to negative 7. So it looks like negative 3 and negative 4. Now to turn the first set of brackets to 0, we would have x being positive 3, and the second set of brackets to turn that to 0, x equals 4. So there are 4 solutions to this particular equation. Okay? All right, on to the second example. Second example I'm going to solve is a little more complicated because it has absolute value on the one side. Okay, that looks very nice. But there's stuff on the right side involving x's. Now, remember we've seen one like this previous, and the trick is you kind of proceed the same way, but you absolutely have to check your answers at the end because there's a possibility of kind of bogus solutions cropping up. So, keeping in mind that this guy here can both be positive or negative, what I would like is I would like this to either be treated as a positive, in which case I simply want it to equal x squared minus 10x, as is. Okay? So that's my one equation. The other possibility is that this x minus 10 business could also have been negative in the first place, and then the absolute value turns it positive, and I would like that to equal x squared minus 10x. So these are my 2 equations. 2 possibilities. Either I treat the stuff inside the absolute value symbol as positive, or I treat it as if it was negative because it's going to turn positive anyway. Now I've got to solve these equations. What you want to do, you want to get 0 on one side and all the other terms on the other side, and it would be nice to keep the x squared term positive. So I'm going to make 0 on the left side, keeping the x squared. I'm going to be subtracting an x over, so this would become minus 11x. And then I'm going to be adding over that 10. Okay, and I think I'm ready to factor this thing. So no greatest common factors, so it looks like we're just going to go to the brackets, and x times an x, and then I need two numbers that make positive 10 that add up to negative 11. So I'm thinking negative 1 times negative 10. Now this seems to give me two solutions, either positive 1 to turn that into 0, or positive 10 to turn that into 0. Now, off we go to the other equation. I'm going to expand out the brackets here first. So negative x and then the double negative becomes plus 10 equals x squared minus 10x. And I like to keep that x squared term positive, so I'm going to move everything over to the right side. So x squared stays positive. I'm going to be adding over the x, so this will become minus 9x. And then I'll be subtracting over that 10, so I'll have a minus 10. And now we go into the factoring. There's no greatest common factors, so we'll make it two sets of brackets. And then we have an x times an x, two numbers that multiply together to make negative 10 that add up to negative 9. So I'm thinking negative 10 and positive 1. So it would look like we have two solutions here. Looks like positive 10, because that's going to turn this set of brackets into 0, and also negative 1 to turn this set of brackets into 0. So it does look like we have potentially three solutions, 1, 10, as well as negative 1. Now, I'm just going to make a note of those possible solutions up here. So we have negative 1, positive 1, and 10 as possible solutions. And what I'm going to do is clear a little room here now, and I'm going to check that those things really work. Okay, so let's clean up the board here a bit. Okay, so let's check that these solutions work. Let's start off with negative 1. If I plug in negative 1, I'll have the absolute value of negative 1 minus 10. This is going to try to equal, so I'm going to put question mark, try to equal negative 1 squared minus 10 times negative 1. So let's have a little look. This would be negative 11, and the absolute value of that turns to positive 11. Over on this side, I get positive 1. And then the double negative here, when multiplied together, makes plus 10. Hey, this guy works. So negative 1 is a solution. Let's try positive 1. Okay, so we're going to plug that in. Absolute value of 1 minus 10. Does that equal 1 squared minus 10 times 1? On this side, I'll have negative 9, which gets turned positive, so that's positive 9. On this side, I'm going to get 1 minus 10, which is negative 9. This does not work, so 1 is not a solution. Okay, now we're going to clear off a little bit more space here. So we had, let's see, negative 1 was, negative 1 was good. Positive 1 was not. Okay, now let's clear off some more room here. Okay, let's get this out of there. All right, so we're good to go. Okay, so we have a solution of negative 1, and the only other one that we want to check is 10. The absolute value of 10 minus 10, does that equal 10 squared minus 10 times 10? Well, this is going to be 0, and this is going to be 100 minus 10 times 10, which is 100. And yeah, so we're going to get 0 equals 0, so the 10 works as well. So here are the two solutions. So we'll just clear out this. And so we could just make a note here that we have solutions are x can equal -1 and +10. And that ends our look at solving absolute value equations using algebra.